Good evening. I'm Ed Murrow. The name of the program is Person to Person. It's all live, no film. Tonight on our customary Friday night visits, we'll cross the continent to visit with Liberace, who I'm sure needs no further introduction. And then we'll go downtown here in New York to Washington Square to meet lawyer Morris Ernst and Mrs. Ernst. We'll be ready to go in exactly 30 seconds.
White rain, use new white rain shampoo tonight, and tomorrow your hair will be sunshine bright. White rain.
Rainwater Soft Shampooing. White Rain's gentle, rich lotion gives rainwater soft suds. Rainwater clean rinsing. For hair sparkling with highlights, bright as sunshine. It's White Rain.
And now back to Edward R. Murrow.
Not since the silent movies and the idols they produced has Hollywood witnessed the sort of pilgrimage that is now going on. Each day, oblivious of time, weather, and the state of the world, sightseers head in the direction of California's San Fernando Valley. For there, at the end of the tourist line, is Sherman Oaks, and the home that Liberace has built for himself and his mother. This is the front, and no one knows how many people have seen that view. And this is the back of the house, and that's Liberace's bedroom. Good evening, Lee.
Good evening, Ed.
What are you doing?
Well, I'm just dictating my weekly syndicated newspaper column, and on my trusty tape recorder here, I also am dictating a book. It's an inspirational book that I'm working on right now.
Well, you mean in addition to radio, television, records, and the movies, you also write?
That's right. It's one of my great ambitions to be a writer.
What are you going to do with all your money?
Well, actually, Ed, I can remember being very, very poor once and making a promise to myself that if I could do anything about it with God's help, I'd never be poor again.
Well, that backboard on the bed there with the musical keyboard, does that have any special significance?
Well, believe it or not, this is where I dream up most of my piano arrangements.
Well, I know there are pianos all over the house. You don't by any chance have one in your bedroom, do you?
Well, not exactly one that plays, but I do have some in the living room that I'd like you to see, 190 of them to be exact. And here they are, Ed.
Lee, out of this whole collection, which are the most interesting?
Well, I love them all, but I guess this one has some special significance. It commemorates the first time I played in Washington for President Truman.
Do you know him well?
Well, I had the great pleasure twice to play for him, as well as twice for Eisenhower. And incidentally, Mr. Murrow, Mr. Truman is the man who gave me the idea for that shirred white beaver fur coat that I wear.
How was that?
Well, he had one made in tan, and I figured as long as he had one, I'd get one too, because I figured we piano players have to stick together.
Any other models there especially worth looking at?
Well, I think maybe this one is my sentimental favorite. This was given to me by my father. It's a replica of the upright piano I learned to play on in Milwaukee many years ago. And in fact, Dad still has the old upright in his home in Madison, Wisconsin.
Lee, I know your father was a musician. I assume, like many fathers, he hoped to see you follow in his footsteps?
Well, actually, Ed, he was a little discouraged about the musical profession because it was during the Depression years that I showed my first interest in music. And he didn't exactly discourage me, but he thought maybe I should follow some other profession that wasn't hit by the Depression. And the only ones that weren't was the medical profession and the undertaking profession, and neither one of those seemed to be for me, and I followed the musical path.
Well,
I'm glad.
Lee, now that you're so successful, do you find that on occasion you have to be just a little bit tough-skinned?
Well, I don't exactly ignore criticism. A lot of criticism that is fair and just, I do pay attention to. In fact, it's been very helpful to me in my life. But then there's the other kind of criticism that is on the destructive side, and I'm glad that God has made me tough-skinned, as you say, so I can ignore it.
Well, then the apparent lack of enthusiasm so far for that picture, Sincerely Yours, the one you made for Warner's, it doesn't particularly bother you.
Well, actually, Ed, I'm very, very thrilled about the encouragement this picture has brought to me. It's my first venture at making motion pictures, and we found that it was the first picture since going my way to win the highest honors from the Legion of Decency. And I'm very, very proud of that fact, as well as the fact that it was made for family entertainment. And I find now that where the picture is playing in neighborhood houses at popular prices where entire families can afford to go, the picture is doing very well. And I'm going to make some more, too.
Tell me, is your brother in that picture, or can't we put any of the blame on him?
Well, George played an active part behind the scenes in the picture. He was the musical advisor and helped me pick out the 31 musical selections that I heard in Sincerely Yours. And by the way, Ed, he's sitting right here in the music room, and I'd like you to come over and meet him.
Good.
George.
Evening, George.
And my sister-in-law, George's beautiful wife, who has been on our television programs many times as an actress, Janie.
Evening.
And my one and only sister, Angelina. We call her Angie.
Good evening, Angie.
How do you do?
George, we've seen a bit of Lee's home. What's your home like?
Well, Ed, it's not exactly like a violin, but I do have a violin-shaped patio. And by the way, I'd like to invite you over to my house sometime.
Good. Angie?
Yes?
Are you married?
Yes, I am, to a building contractor who incidentally added a room to Lee's house where we were married.
Oh, did he? Well, I suppose you keep busy being a housewife and watching your two brothers on television, is that right?
Well, that's true, but I also act as his secretary.
Do you?
I do.
Well, what was Christmas like for the secretary to Liberace?
Oh, believe me, it's the busiest time of the year. We sent out some 85,000 cards this year. But there's also a bright side. We received more than 100,000 in return, a few of them for the dog.
Angie?
Yes?
You were married on the porch there of Lee's home, weren't you?
That's right.
Could we see the bridal setting, so to speak?
You sure can, Ed.
Did her husband design just this part of the house or the whole thing, Lee?
Well, just that part of the house. I designed the rest of the house down to the very smallest detail.
Uh-huh. Lee, what about you? You given much thought to getting married and eventually settling down?
Well, actually, I have, Ed. I've given a lot of thought to marriage, but I don't believe in getting married just for the sake of getting married. I want to someday find the perfect mate and settle down to what I hope will be a marriage that will be blessed by faith and will be a lasting union. In fact, I was reading about lovely young Princess Margaret, and she's looking for her dream man, too, and I hope she finds him someday.
Have you ever met the princess?
Not as yet, but I have great hopes of meeting her when I go to England next season. I'm going to give a concert in London, and I'd like to meet her very much because I think we have a lot in common. We have the same taste and in the theater and music, and besides, she's pretty and she's single.
Well, could we move on and see a little more of the house?
Sure. This, incidentally, is the entry hall, and out here is the room where Angie and Tom were married. And by the way, this is the kitchen where my mother spends most of her time cooking up those high-calorie meals.
Uh-huh.
And that is when she's not watching the wrestling on television.
Do you think she's watching wrestling now?
Well, she might be watching wrestling and not person to person. Let's go and see. She's
Good.
in the trophy room here. Hello, Mom.
Hello, son.
Good evening, Mrs. Liberace.
Hello, how have you been?
Fine, thank you. Lee was telling me that you're a wrestling fan. When we visited the Trumans, we discovered Mrs. Truman likes wrestling, too.
Well, son, I guess you stop kidding me now.
Okay, Mom.
Mrs. Liberace, how are you standing up under the tourist and the sightseer invasion? What goes on there in that home in the course of a day?
Well, average 200 people come and ring at the doorbells. Well, they are satisfied if I give them a picture, autographed picture, or either if they only can shake hands with me.
Uh-huh. Must be something of a nuisance, though, isn't it?
Yes, well, it isn't. It's, okay.
Good. Lee, there were
Yes.
less glamorous and exciting times, weren't there, for you?
Yes, there certainly were, Ed. I hope Mom won't mind my telling about them, because I can remember just a few years ago when things weren't quite so glamorous. In fact, I used to wear George's hand-me-down clothes. George and I used to go to the county relief, and we used to get rations from the relief department. And there's a little bright side to all of this, too, Ed. I can recall being in Milwaukee just recently, and the relief department said that now, apparently, I was doing well. They want me to pay them back for all the groceries. So I gave them a check for $132. It doesn't sound like a lot, but in those days, that bought a lot of beans, rice, and barley, didn't it, Mom?
That's right.
I gather that must have been a period in your life that made a deep impression, didn't it?
A very deep impression, and I think that's probably the reason why I'm as devoted to my mother as I am, because during those Depression years, she worked very, very hard, and she worked in a grocery store, and when she'd come home at night, she would embroider women's hosiery, which were in fashion at the time, and she did all those things, and I think if I have a tendency to be a little lavish sometime on her and on myself in the way of my clothes, I go overboard. I think it's because I remember the drab beginnings in our life.
Lee, is your mother ever critical of anything you do?
Yes.
Well, she's inclined to be my best critic, though.
And I have everything my heart desired today.
Oh, that's nice, Mom.
Good. Lee, I've heard a lot about that outdoor piano you have. Could we see it?
Oh, sure, Ed. Excuse me, Mom.
Sure.
Go ahead and watch the wrestling.
I sure will. Thank you.
It's right out here, Ed. And we have a lovely night out here in California. I wish you could be out here. Our pool is heated, and it's 78 degrees, just right.
Uh-huh.
And the fountain that you see in the background is given to me by my arranger, and also he's responsible for the musical fence out there.
That is quite a fence. It isn't a musical fence, is it?
Well, in the sense that it has 16 bars of music on it. It's one of my original compositions called Rhapsody by Candlelight. But since it can't play it for you, Ed, I'll go in the house and play it for you on my piano, okay?
Good. Let's see how it goes.
Well, it goes like this. Well, that's all the room we had on the fence for it.
Lee, how old are you?
I'm 35, Ed.
Well, at 35, looking back at all that's happened, what comes to your mind first?
Ed, I would say that God has been very, very good to us in making all of this happen to our family. And I suppose that nowhere but in the United States could this happen to an ordinary American family like ours.
Well,
I'm very grateful.
Well, surely something must get under your skin once in a while, doesn't it?
Well, about the only thing that bothers me is when people accuse me of having a following only of nice old ladies. I have nothing against the nice old ladies, but I like nice young ladies, too.
Well, Lee, thanks very much for letting us come and visit you. It's been very pleasant. And will you say good night to the rest of your family for us?
I certainly would.
Thanks a lot.
so much.
Good night, Lee.
Good night, Ed.
In just a moment, we'll take you for a visit to Mr. and Mrs. Morris Ernst.
Good evening. I'm Gloria Lewis. Say, just between us, ladies, wouldn't you love a permanent that could actually wave new softness and manageability right into your hair? Give you a complete hair beauty treatment as you wave? Well, I'm going to show you amazing proof that new creamy prom does just that. Actually waves new softness and manageability right into your hair. Now, here's a dramatic slow-motion test of softness and manageability no other permanent has dared to make. I guarantee you have never seen a brand new permanent comb so soft and behave so beautifully. The secret, new Creamy Prom is the first and only permanent with homogenized waving cream. Now look, ordinary waving solutions are thin and drippy. They often leave your hair dry and frizzy, hard to manage. But Prom's homogenized waving cream is thick, rich with costly conditioning ingredients. Oh, it leaves your hair in better condition than any other permanent. And Prom's homogenized waving cream makes it so easy. There's no dripping, no rinsing, no timing, no messy neutralizer. Just smooth it on, roll it up, and you've got yourself a Prom. So if you want new softness and manageability waved right into your hair, get new Creamy Prom. And girls, even if you're between permanents, don't wait to try Prom's homogenized waving cream. Get the new Creamy Prom End Curl Kit today. And now, back to Edward R. Murrow.
Morris Ernst is one of the nation's best-known lawyers. For about 40 years, he's fought against censorship and for civil liberties, and he's enjoyed every fight. In between his legal cases, Morris Ernst has written some 15 books, consulted with mayors, governors, and presidents, written for magazines, and made many trips abroad. After his marriage to a schoolteacher and author, Margaret Samuels, he helped manage the growing up of their 3 children. Morris Ernst was born in Alabama 67 years ago. He spent almost half his life in Greenwich Village in downtown Manhattan. When their children were young, the Ernsts had a big house on 11th Street. Now they live in this modern apartment house, 4 rooms, overlooking Washington Square. Evening, Morris.
Good evening, Ed.
Tell me, how do you like apartment living after all your years in that big house that was so pleasant?
Well, I hated giving up the house, but now I'm happy I've gotten rid of all my possessions. You know, things tyrannize people. We don't want any more things.
Morris, I noticed you looking out the window when we arrived. What do you see out there?
Well, that's the Arch, Washington Arch, and there's the park. And this is a neighborhood, scarce in a big city, where people have a concern with what goes on. We see the children. In summer, we see the people playing musical instruments. And there are the people playing checkers and chess over at the other corner.
So
people have a deep concern in this neighborhood for the neighborhood itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like any village in the United States.
That's one reason you like it, isn't it?
Yes, I think life is only good when you live less than 6 stories above the ground, because if you live above 6 stories, you haven't got your roots in our great country.
Tell me, where's Margaret?
Margaret's right over here, Ed. Here's your Margaret right here.
Evening, Margaret.
Welcome to Washington Square, Ed.
Thank you very much. How do you keep busy now after all your years of teaching school, bringing up 3 children, and taking care of a big house?
Very easy. I now have 3 grandchildren. I tried to help not bring up. We travel a lot. Last year we went around the world. This year we're going to Russia if things stay as they are now.
Mm-hmm.
I have time to read to my heart's content, something I've always wanted to do all my life.
Do you help Morris in his work?
Well, of course. He doesn't know how to spell or punctuate. And I do talk other things over with him, too.
You've written a few books yourself about the history of words.
Yes, I have. The first one was a textbook for children on etymology called Words. The second one was one with wonderful Thurber illustrations called In a Word, and the third one was called More About Words. Your name means guardian of property. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that, no. I'm glad to know it, but I'm misnamed, I'm afraid.
I was thinking it isn't really very appropriate.
Morris, about your latest book, Utopia 1976. First, how did you come to write it? And second, what are your credentials for peering into the future, you glandular optimist?
Well, I reread all the utopians, and I got very irritated at the people who look with despair on our great republic. And I've had a love affair with this republic for over a half a century. And so I wanted to predict for my grandchildren, at least, what this country will be like.
All right, now let's see how much we can absorb of your ideas of life 20 years from now. You ready?
I'm ready, shoot.
All right, let's start with transportation.
Transportation, 2 hours to London or Marrakesh. No more gasoline in airplanes, either atomic energy or solar energy or maybe ionic batteries.
What's our health picture for the future?
Well, in my youth, Ed, TB was killer number 1. By 1976, all the present known diseases will be detected and cured, and there'll only be one disease left, old age.
Well, what will this do to our population?
Oh, about 200 million people, that's all. There'll be less families with many children and less families with no children. And population will not be as high as our experts predict.
Well, what about the family life in this utopia of yours?
Oh, violent change is happening now. In my youth, no man, rich or poor, changed diapers or washed dishes. Now the young couples are leading a cooperative family home. In my youth, no boy saw much of his father when he worked 70 hours a week. Girls brought up under the image of an adult woman learned a little about housekeeping. Now, Papa and son are going off with their outboard motor or fishing.
Well, how long will we work in this utopia of yours, Morris?
Well, my father worked 70 hours a week. We're down to 40. Farmers are down to 52. By 1976, it'll only be 30 hours, and many professions and trades are already down to 30 hours.
What kind of incomes will we have, Morris?
The incomes will be at least double. We have a national output of about $400 billion today. It'll be $1 trillion in 1976 with the new sources of energy, and the family income will average about $25,000 in present dollars.
What will our cities be like?
The big cities are evaporating already because people are moving to the countryside where they can spend their leisure, because this is the most precious commodity of our republic.
What about communications?
Communication, there'll be no more telephone poles or wires. The energy for the home will come in so cheap that it won't pay to put a meter in for light and heat.
Do you foresee any big changes in government, Morris?
I foresee at least two big changes. We'll have a cabinet minister of weather. We can't make climate, but we can already shift rain. And this will be an important cabinet post. Also, we'll have a secretary of research who will present to the chief magistrate of our nation the budget research of the United States and find out where the young men should go in the various scientific fields.
And in agriculture?
Agriculture, the farmers are going to be the chemists of the future, like the garage men were the gadgeteers. And we already can grow vegetables twice as big in half the time.
Well, what does the housewife have to look forward to in your utopia 20 years from now, Morris?
Well, she's going to have a lot of gadgets. Going to take away some of the drudgery. But the three great revolutions are already happening. The elimination of the moth, of rust, and the common cold.
Well, Morris, so far, everything looks wonderful for your 1976. Now give us the gloomy side of the utopia you foresee.
Well, in my book, I'm afraid only of one thing. That through the growth of monopoly and big business, and these economic empires, we're going to eliminate free enterprise. Business will get so big that our people stupidly will ask the government to take it over, and the government will then get too big, and I see a danger of our going totalitarian, not through socialism or communism, but through monopoly and big business.
Mm-hmm. Margaret, do you have any major exceptions to Morris's pleadings, or should I say his dreams?
Well, when I was married to him 33 years ago, I used to argue occasionally. But I've learned since then that he has real precognition and clairvoyance, and he usually turns out to be right. So I don't really have any exceptions.
Morris, let's move backwards from the future to the past. I know you used to write weekly letters to President Franklin Roosevelt. What have you done with his replies?
Well, I've got them. I've kept them. I've got a big collection of these weekly letters. I've got letters from Truman, letters from Eisenhower, and the cabinet down in Washington. I've only framed one letter. Some foolish friends of mine suggested to Roosevelt that I become a judge. And I wrote him I didn't want to be a judge. I'd be a lousy judge. I wouldn't be happy. And he wrote me back this precious letter saying, "You're a man after my own heart," and didn't understand why either he or I would want to be a judge in those exciting times.
Morris, in all the exciting times you've enjoyed, do you feel we've made any really substantial progress in the battle for free speech and against censorship in all its forms?
Well, we're constantly making progress, but I believe that freedom is a luxury and will always have to be fought for. And it's good for people to have to fight for freedom, because the mob chases the man who's afraid. And As I see it, we will continue to have to fight for freedom of the human spirit and for a free marketplace of thought.
Well, Morris Ernst, I've known you for a long time, and I've never known you when you didn't see some injustice in the law, something that you thought demanded correction. What's your major objection today?
Well, the major thing I'm working on is the frightful discrimination against the people of talent. The baseball player, the singer, the writer, the actor, they can't keep enough money out of their big earnings to send their kids to college. Whereas the entrepreneur, the sharpshooter, he can get away with buying and selling stocks and only pay 25% tax. And I resent deeply this discrimination against the creative energy of the people of our republic.
Margaret, what do you and Morris do to get away from all your problems and all your dreams?
Well, we travel, and of course we go to Nantucket in the summer. We're up in Nantucket from Decoration Day with all of our children and our grandchildren. Morris works in his carpentry shop. As a matter of fact, this is one of his bits of handiwork, this table. And we sail, we go cruising in Maine, I work in the garden. Ed, if we've got time, this is something I'd like you to listen to. Can you recognize that?
Yes, it's the Westminster Chimes.
It's the Westminster Chimes, yes. Morris raised money for the rehabilitation of Westminster Abbey here last year. And when we went over to a party, they presented him with this box made by the Queen's jeweler. And it does indeed play the Westminster Chimes.
Must be a very precious possession.
Oh, it is. The heirloom.
Morris, it must be tough to come back to New York after the quiet of Nantucket, isn't it?
Not particularly, Ed. I lead sort of two separate lives. I sail a boat with Margaret up on the Maine coast a month every year. Loaf around 3 months for 35 years. I've done it in Nantucket.
Well, don't stay up there too long the next time you go, Morris, because the yeast that you provide is needed down here. Thanks very much, Morris Ernst. Good night, Margaret.
Good night, Ed.
Good night,
Good night.
Ed.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll be back in a moment.
Paper-mate pens write so smooth.
With the new silver tip.
The point of the ordinary ball pen gets chewed up by friction and harmful ink chemicals. This means leaky, skippy writing. But Papermate Silver Tip stops this wear. Yes, this exclusive Papermate Silver Tip gives you smooth and easy writing every time.
Buy a Papermate, you'll say it's great when you write with a Papermate pen. Papermate.
Now back to Edward R. Murrow.
Next week, we'll visit two old friends, Mr. and Mrs. H.V. Kaltenborn, and musical comedy star Carol Channing and her husband from Nyack, New York. Those are some of the people who made tonight's program possible. And now, from person to person, good night and good luck.
There it is, the familiar Amoco oval sign, where you'll find the only gas that can't put lead in your engine. The new clear white Amoco gas. The one gas that's all gas. Every drop of unleaded Amoco gas delivers usable octane power for extra miles of driving. Next week, Amoco gas, the gas that contains no lead, presents Person to Person with Edward R. Murrow.